So, thank you very much for inviting me to speak. For those of you who have arrived late or don't know me, my name is Kevin Bishop. I have the honour of being Chief Executive of what I think is the best national park in the UK, if not the world. I'm going to stop there. So, in setting or inviting me to speak today, Kevin set out a series of challenges or questions that he wanted me to address. And I'm going to try and do that under three themes: plumage and purpose, people and partnerships, pressures and pangs. And I hope that by the end of my allotted time you'll be clear what I mean by those three themes. I have to confess I'm not an ornithologist, nor am I an ecologist, and I think by the time you become chief executive of any organisation, you become a generalist. And you have to skate over thin ice a lot of the time, and I feel like I might be doing that today. So bear with me. So, I get to the first of my themes. It was interesting, Martin had that slide, didn't he, of those early nature conservationists. I actually thought it was RSPB's new uniform that they were wearing. So what are national parks about? What's their purpose? Are they about biodiversity? Yes, they are. And if you come back on a journey through time with me, I just want to set the context of what our national parks are all about. So go back to the 18th century, to those campaigners that led to the establishment of the RSPB. They were campaigning against the millinery trade, plumage. They were also campaigning against the eradication of birds of prey. Their vision, and if you look at the writings of the Selborne Society and so forth, their vision was of wildlife sanctuaries, that's their exact terminology, of areas where you would allow wildlife to thrive by drawing a line on a map and letting it or leaving it alone. They were also campaigning for national parks as part of that wildlife sanctuary concept. But there was also another movement, a movement inspired by the writings of William Wordsworth and others, and their vision was of national parks to conserve aesthetic beauty. And Dartmoor Preservation Association can trace its roots back to that movement. So their concern was what you see with your eyes, if you like, physical, natural beauty. And again, they wanted national parks. And then, whoops, I've gone ahead too far. Third movement was a movement for public access to the countryside. Remember, at the time we were a newly industrialised nation, people drifting from rural areas into urban areas, literally struggling to breathe at times. Wake weeks led to a demand for green space, open fields and countryside. So three movements campaigning for national parks, very separate in their vision. They came together, and eventually, with the aftermath of World War II, they secured their vision of national parks. And the 1949 Act mirrors those three movements in terms of the way in which it set up national parks on our system of designations. There was also clarity in the aftermath of World War II about national parks being sustained by traditional farming practices. A view that by retaining farming systems, you would keep the special qualities of the national parks. A consensus amongst people like John Dower, Arthur Hobhouse and so forth. Come forward, 1995, and our national parks were given a new purpose. They were given a purpose pertaining to cultural heritage, particularly important for Dartmoor because of the concentration of archaeological remains. So that purpose added to, if you like, nature conservation, landscape conservation, public access. Turn the clock forward to now, and I think there's a growing agenda about national parks also being about water management and carbon management, and I think David Smith from South West Water is in the audience today, and I'll touch on one of the projects we've been running with them. Our upland's really important for all of those resources. And what's our role as a National Park Authority? Our role really is to balance all of those competing demands and ensure that we sustain the resource, maximise the benefits. as an organisation, we have very few powers. Don't spread this. We have very few powers. We're probably famous or infamous for being the planning authority, but take that out of the equation, and actually we have to work with people. People are at the heart of everything we do, which brings me to the second of my themes, people and partnerships. So, for the last 3 years, all 10 national parks in England have been running a campaign, Love Your National Parks. It's been about trying to get people to reconnect with our national parks and our natural world. We're not alone in trying to do this. Wildlife Trust, I think this week, launched Every Child Wild. National Trust has had that, 50 things to do by the age of 11 3/4, which I assume everyone in this room has done. So it's about trying to get people to cherish the natural environment. Dartmoor officially has 2.4 million visitors per annum. Being candid, that's a total underestimate because it counts people who stay for more than 2 hours. A lot of those visitors, I think, come, either drive through the landscape, or if we're lucky, they walk through the landscape, cycle or run through it. They perhaps appreciate the opportunity to get out. How many of them actually understand the landscape they're walking through? How many of them would recognise the songs of different birds or identify them when they see them? And our challenge is to take the very obvious passion that people have for national parks and to harness that to help us look after it in the future. And it's interesting that an Ipsos Mori poll said that 90% of the sampled population thought national parks were a good thing. And I'd like to keep reminding politicians that that's stat as well. One of the questions which I think Kevin Cox posed to me was, actually, are we loving our national parks to death? This isn't people running to the national park meeting, unfortunately, or running away from a national park meeting indeed. Many of you who are resident around Dartmoor will recognise that it is actually 10 tours, held on the second Saturday in May. 2,400 young people starting the challenge, and it is a challenge, not a race. A challenge to complete 35, 45 or 55 miles between sunrise on the Saturday and sunset on the Sunday, and to check into 10 tours. 2,400 people, and perhaps more importantly, there are 600 people who take part in the Jubilee Challenge for less able people. Get an opportunity, go and support them, because actually I think that is what 10 Tours is all about. So are we loving our national park to death? Is that sort of thing problematic? It's the only large-scale recreational event that we permit in the bird breeding season or the calving lambing season. And we work hard to try and reconcile the difficulties. So there are maps that we keep under review of rare bird breeding areas. They're shared with the team managers at this time of year in early October. They're used also by the military in terms of their training patterns as well. We identify key routes through some of the rare bird breeding areas. Increasingly, we're using volunteers to police them, so to observe during the event itself. And there are now spotters out during the training period. And most of the impact of 10 Tours is actually during the training period, not the event itself, I would argue. We're also trying to get the groups to appreciate the landscape they're walking through. Not heads down, but to actually understand the environment. And I know there's at least one team manager in the audience. It's a challenge not just to complete those tours, but I hope to get an appreciation of the national park, to actually be able to spot a ring ouzel, to know something about the farming systems that have created the national park and so forth. And 2 years ago, because of the tragic incident around Charlotte Shaw, we worked with the MOD and with the team managers to redesign 10 Tours. So it's less follow my leader across the moor, more of an emphasis on navigational skills, and if you look at the new format for 10 tours, it takes some of the pressure away from the heart of the National Park. So more safety control points around the outside. So I think 10 tours is a good thing. Yes, we'd like it moved, but the MOD say it's the only time of the year that they can spare the resource to organise it. And without the MOD, it wouldn't be 10 tours. So continuing with the theme of people and partnerships, this has been a highly effective partnership for us, so thank you Devon Birds and thank you BTO. The flight of the cuckoo. You're more of an expert on the cuckoo than I am, but for us it was a good project because it's enabled us to get people engaged in nature conservation, to tell a story of the importance of the National Park for biodiversity. So 2013 we tagged, I think it was 4 cuckoos so that we could satellite track them. We then had a competition so people could name them, which was good. And then we tracked them on their migratory flight. We also got people to report their sightings and soundings of cuckoos, which is what's plotted on the map to the right-hand side. And it was a good storyline for us because if you went to a parish council meeting, you went to a country fair, so we could tell the story of the cuckoo. We could tell you that actually the English cuckoos go on a different flight path to their Celtic cousins from Wales and Scotland. I don't know the reasons why. We know that at least one of our cuckoos stopped off for a short break in Mallorca on the route. But it also brought home the fragility of the cuckoo because actually not all of them returned. So that shows just how fragile our natural systems are. And for us it also demonstrated the importance of Dartmoor for that particular species. So continuing with people and partnerships, you've probably heard of Africa's Big Five. Really important theme for Africa. But what you might not have heard of is Dartmoor's Little Five. So the first of our Little Five, the cuckoo. So we want to continue the success of the cuckoo. Yeah, it's a 10,000-mile flight to the Congolese rainforests. And this is something that we're working on at the moment. This is a preview, a bit like Martin's preview earlier. Something that my colleagues in the ecology section are working on to try and get greater people engagement in this agenda. Second up is the threatened marsh fritillary butterfly, globally threatened, and definitely a small species. But not all of our little five are actually that little. The next one is the world's largest land slug. So the black slug can grow to 20 centimetres, so watch out all you gardeners, but it's mostly found in woodlands, so you're safe. And again, it's an opportunity to get people interested in this, particularly young people who are interested in slugs, it seems. And if you want some Christmas presents, you can now buy plastic replicas in our visitor centres. That's the commercial. Number 4, and they're in no particular order, is the blue ground beetle. One of the largest and rarest beetles in the UK. Not that we got an inferiority complex because we call it Dartmoor's Little Five, that we got to big up the big ones. But the blue ground beetle is one of the biggest beetles in Britain. Nationally rare, mostly found on Dartmoor. And the 5th of our Little Five is the otter, where we hope to build on some of the stories of Tarka to get people's imagination and to tell the importance of Dartmoor and some of the tributaries that run up of Dartmoor for the otter. So a tool for people engagement. I wanted to touch very briefly on the Dartmoor Mines project. Successful partnership from our perspective with South West Water, Environment Agency, Natural England, Duchy of Cornwall, the principal landowners, the commoners, the Forest of Dartmoor Commoners Association. Something that, being perfectly candid, we got criticised for. Why are you doing this? Why are you taking alien machinery out into a pristine environment? Well, A, it's not a pristine environment. B, the machinery has less ground pressure than me, and any normal human being, if I am normal. And it was a pilot project for us, and it was about delivering multiple benefits. Remember that first slide about sort of all the benefits of national parks? For us, this was a test. It was about actually establishing Could we restore the mires? Could we deliver South West Water's agenda of greater water storage, better water quality? Could we restore the mires for carbon? And could we deliver biodiversity benefits? The monitoring is still going on, and it has been a success so far in terms of biodiversity. 38% increase in Dunlin territory numbers, that's RSPB's figures. Largely attributable to the restoration carried out through the Mines project. So thank you South West Water for funding it. And thank you the other partners for sticking with us as we implemented the 5-year pilot programme. Another of the programmes that we're running at the moment is called More Than Meets the Eye. It's a landscape partnership scheme, funding from the Heritage Lottery Fund, over 20 projects. Chrissy Mason's here from the project team, so she can answer your awkward questions at lunchtime. I just want to highlight one or two of the projects that are funded through that. Parishscapes, which we are running, is a grant scheme for parishes and parish groups within the More Than Meets the Eye area. It's all about getting people engaged in heritage, cultural heritage and their natural heritage. So North Bobby, anyone here from North Bobby? North Bobby was one of the first parishes to sign up for this. They've done survey work, community science, looking at their local environment. We hope it's a way in which we can engage with people, harness their obvious pride in their local environment, and get them to help us look after the national park for future generations. Moorland Birds is another project, this one being run by RSPB. Initially focused on the redback shrike, now widened to look at other moorland bird species. Natural Connections is all about key habitats, in particular roast pasture, conserving those habitats, joining them up. A bit of the Lawton Review agenda within Dartmoor. And as a whole, the project's about telling the Dartmoor story, getting people to stay a bit longer, learn a bit more, leave a little less, and spend a bit more in some of our local businesses. Farmers. They've been mentioned this morning by almost all of our speakers, I think. Farmers are a key partner for the National Park. 90% of the National Park is farm landscape. 30,000 odd hectares are common land as well. The landscapes that led to the designation of the National Park were created by the farming community. Now, if you've been reading the Western Morning News recently, it might have come across your attention that we hosted UK National Parks Conference and we invited a certain gentleman, George Monbiot, to give a presentation. George is no shrinking violet. He's a great polemicist. We invited him because we knew he would be entertaining and we knew that he would challenge the audience. George never lets facts get in the way of a good story, it has to be said. His quote about national parks having less biodiversity value than multi-storey car parks does not stand scrutiny. I love his phrase about the Lake District being sheep-wrecked. I'm not certain my colleague in the Lake District agrees. And you'll have seen that he also came up with the phrase white plague. For us, actually, there was an important sub-message within George Monbiot's presentation, which the press did not pick up, because the press always like the shock and awe story, don't they? George's subliminal message was all about our disconnect from nature, our natural disconnect from nature, and the way in which we're increasingly connected to a virtual world rather than the natural world. And he was challenging national parks to do something about that. And I think that's a perfectly valid challenge. Rewilding our national parks is a slightly different challenge, and you might have some questions about that. The farming community are key custodians of the national park. This map shows the area under agri-environment scheme coverage as of earlier this year. Thank you, Natural England, for the data. So you'll see that almost 70% of the surface area of the national park is covered by an agri-environment scheme at present. Those schemes bring in almost £7 million per annum to the Dartmoor economy. into farmers' pockets through agri-environment scheme payments. That's double the amount of money that comes to the National Park. Not that I'm bitter, because actually I see agri-environment schemes as a key tool for delivering National Park purposes. But increasingly with those agri-environment schemes, I think we need to question how effective they are going forward, the extent to which they empower and engage the farming community, and this dichotomy as to whether we are paying for prescription or we're paying for results. And on Dartmoor, we've been piloting a new approach called Dartmoor Farming Futures. Again, it's another example of partnership working, this time with the Commoners Council, Duchy of Cornwall, RSPB, Natural England, and support from RSPB, and initially from the MOD as well. So an unusual mix of bedfellows. Farming Futures is a pilot scheme. We're running it on the Forest of Dartmoor, which is our biggest common block, and also on Haytor, probably our most famous common. It offers farmers and landowners the opportunity to design, deliver, and monitor the agri-environment scheme. There's no new money. The HLS scheme is, if you like, put to one side. They've designed their own agri-environment scheme. It's outcome focused. They deliver, or they design the outcomes, which are then signed off by Natural England and some of the other agencies. There are no set prescriptions in terms of when you have to turn your cattle out, when you have to take them off the moor, or indeed the numbers. The farmers are allowed to decide the land management to deliver the outcomes that they agreed. And it also delivers the complete range of ecosystem services, so biodiversity, landscape, food, and so forth. The outcomes, as I said, are designed by them. So in terms of biodiversity, the outcome relates to triple SIs, 50% in favourable condition by 2020. You might have a debate as to whether that was ambitious or not. Archaeology is another of the outcomes, and the archaeology relates to PALs, not friends of mine, but premier archaeological landscapes, and specific targets about restoring a certain number of scheduled monuments that appear on the at-risk register. Food production is also one of those outcomes, and I think that's important that we recognise that farmers are delivering multiple benefits. We've got the farmers involved in the monitoring. So 60 of them, I think it's more than that now, have been trained by Natural England to do triple SI monitoring for them. So when they're driving out on their quad bikes, they've now got quadrants. They've had, if you like, check sheets which show them different species. So they've been trained in species recognition. They have photographs of what good and bad look like. They are doing some of the monitoring. And I think that's good because it gets them engaged, a greater understanding. We're trying to empower them. It's at early days, but I'd like to thank the partners who helped us get to this point, and to the farmers who have actually signed up to this approach. So the last of my three themes, pressures and pangs. I have no crystal ball, because if I did, I'd have filled in my lottery ticket many years ago and I would be stood in front of you now. I think one of our biggest challenges or pressures is that nature deficit disorder. How do we get people connected with nature again? And I suppose if I had one wish, it would be to reconnect one person with nature. I hasten to add that's not a political statement, it's a personal statement. I would like to see the Chancellor acknowledge that the environment can be an engine for sustainable growth, not a barrier to it, and that actually the natural environment is key to people's happiness, which David Cameron committed to measuring. So what about pressures and pangs then? It would be easier just to focus on pressures and not to talk about sort of the counterbalance. So pressures, in the National Park we've seen a 40% real terms reduction in our funding over the last 5 years, and we've probably got another cut coming through the spending review. If it's as much as is forecast of 25 to 40%, there won't be much in terms of the organisation left. I sincerely hope it isn't that much. We're being told you need to generate income from sales and charges, you need to be going for commercial sponsorship, you need to be looking at philanthropic donations. Your model, says our minister, is the British Museum, who raise most of their money from those other sources and have a small core grant. The British Museum, last time I visited, was in a self-contained building that you walked through the door into, and you could control what went on in that environment and so forth. The National Park isn't a controlled environment. We don't own it. Well, in fact, we own less than 1%. And it is a multi-purpose landscape. People. I think some of the other presentations have picked up the people thing. 2.4 million visitors per annum, and that's an underestimate. Population growth around Dartmoor, 7% between 2010 and 2001 and 2011. And that's within a 45-minute drive time. And if you look at future projections, then we're going to get in excess of 21,000 new homes within a 20-minute drive time of Dartmoor. Plymouth is expanding literally to the southwesterly edge of the National Park. Teignbridge is also growing at a certain pace, and Exeter as well. 2 new settlements, all of that will add a pressure to the National Park. You could argue that's an opportunity to get more people engaged in the National Park and the understanding of the natural environment. Farming, we know that countryside stewardship has a much reduced pot to the old stewardship schemes. I think Dartmoor is relatively safe in the sense that we have a lot of schemes that were entered into at the beginning of this period and therefore could last through the current programme period. But I think there's a bigger threat, and that is that actually farmers potentially turn their back on agri-environment. They make a conscious decision not to stay in the scheme, particularly if we focus too much on prescription and don't empower them a bit more. And climate change. I'm not with George Bush. I think climate change is with us. I think we're seeing it. It's already impacting on Dartmoor. Longer growing season, more vegetation. And I don't know whether we are seeing the demise of the curlew and other key wading birds on Dartmoor. Certainly we have a project with the Dutch MOD and others looking at the wading birds. I'm encouraged by what RSPB are doing with ringoos and so forth. I'd love to see us being able to do something positive for the curlew, because every spring I listen to hear whether it's still there or not. And every year I fear it will be a silent spring in terms of the curlew. Hopefully not. Thank you for listening. I don't know whether I've gone over time, under time, but I'd better turn back to my chairman's hat and invite questions.